Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the Burgh Breakdown. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, and it's going to be a very interesting trade deadline coming up for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So that's how we're going to lead off the show. We're going to talk, I would say, all things Pittsburgh Pirates trade deadline, but we're going to talk specifically about the one target that everybody is talking about on the trade market right now, and he just so happens to be a native of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. So we'll lead off the show with that. But then the Penguins, are they closer to contention than everybody thinks? We'll talk about why I feel that way later in the show, and then we'll close things out with 5 players who will define the 2026 season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But let's start with baseball because, I mean, when the Pirates are playing as well as they have this season, they deserve to get some run as the number one topic on the show. So we're going to talk Pirates, especially because, I mean, the trade deadline is just 11 days away, at least as of this recording. And as of this recording, the Pirates are also just a half game out of a playoff spot. So when you put those two things together, I mean, I have Bucko fever. Most of you have Bucko fever. Shoot, Penguins president of hockey operations and general manager Kyle Dubas has Bucko fever. So let's talk about the Pirates, because for the first time in a long time, they should be true buyers at the MLB trade deadline. Yeah, in 2024, they went out and they got, Brian De La Cruz, and they got Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, and there were rumors that they were in on Jazz Chisholm, only for the New York Yankees to swoop in and pick him up. But I don't consider that truly buying, because, yeah, they plugged a couple holes, but did they do anything to substantially add to their team? I wouldn't think so. This year, they should do that. They should make substantial moves that improve the team right now. And if you look at the Pirates' needs, it comes down to 3 things: pitching, pitching, and pitching. And when it comes to that, there's only one name that you can start with, and that's Mason Miller. He is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best relief pitcher in all of Major League Baseball. If you look at what he's done this season, his first full year as a San Diego Padre, 0.86 ERA in 41 2/3 innings pitched. He has made 25 saves in 25 opportunities, which, if you're looking at the Pirates, and one of the biggest issues that they have is they are among the league leaders in blown saves. Look no further than what we saw on Saturday night of last week against the Cleveland Guardians. This guy is a perfect 25 for 25. He throws 100 plus miles an hour seemingly on every pitch, and acquiring him immediately and unequivocally solidifies a role that has been left vacant since the Pirates traded away David Bednar 1 year ago at the deadline in 2025. They've been trying to find somebody to take that mantle from Bednar. Dennis Santana got the first crack because, well, last year he was pretty good, and at times he shared that role with David Bednar. But it has been a disastrous season for Dennis Santana. Then they throw Gregory Soto in the mix there. And for a time, it looked like it was working out pretty well for the Pirates and for Soto. Unfortunately, it hasn't looked that way for the past month plus for Gregory Soto. They've given Mason Montgomery a couple kicks at the can. Only one time was he brought in an actual save situation, and he was successful in that role. But at the same time, they want him in 8 other roles. They want him to be the opener. They want him to be the 7th inning guy. They want him to be the firefighter whenever a starter can't finish an inning, or whenever, I think it was a reliever on Wednesday afternoon that Mason Montgomery came in for and closed off an inning to go 4 outs against the New York Yankees. But not only does he come in, elevate your team for this year, a year in which your hopes are higher than they have been in a decade if you're a Penguins, if you're a Pirates fan. But you also have 3 more years of control of this guy. You have him for the foreseeable future. So he matches up with your Connor Griffins. He matches up with your Esmeralyn Valdezes. He matches up with the remainder of Paul Skeens. He matches up with when Seth Hernandez might be up at the MLB level. There's really no question as to whether or not Mason Miller is a fit in Pittsburgh. The biggest question is, are the Padres a fit when it comes to making a deal? There have been a few reports this week that have come out about what the Padres might be looking for in a potential Mason Miller trade. Jeff Passan, who is the MLB's top insider for ESPN, said pretty much Mason Miller is available. No ifs, ands, or buts. Mason Miller is available. But a couple of things we've heard. One, they would like to also attach a bad contract to Miller to send out when Miller is departing the organization. I'm looking at guys like Manny Machado. That contract is horrendous. I'm looking at a guy like Xander Bogaerts. That contract is not good. I'm looking at a guy who's batting under 200 and making a heck of a lot of money in Jake Cronenworth that they might be trying to offload. That is a no-go for the Pirates. If there is any team in Major League Baseball that's not going to take on a contract, specifically a contract that is as bad as, let's say, for example, the Manny Machado deal, where he's under contract until 2033 when he's going to be 40 years old and making, I think it's $40 million a year after this year. Yeah, that's a no-go. That's a non-starter for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, if there's a team out there that will take that, then I guess you just have to rule the Pirates out of it. But there's a chance that there's no team out there that looks at Machado or Bogaerts or Cronenworth. You know, I know a lot of people throw Jackson Merrill in there because he's having a bad season, but they're years away from giving up on Jackson Merrill. So don't even think about trying to bring him in and being like, well, all of a sudden he's better. That's not going to be the case. It's probably one of those three: Machado, Bogaerts, or Cronenworth. Pirates aren't going to bring any of those three in. They're not going to eat those contracts. And the other thing we heard is that the Padres are looking for a major league ready starter. The Pirates have a couple of value. The only problem is they're already really thin in that area after trading Johan Oviedo and Mike Burrows over the winter to acquire pieces that, yes, in the case of Burrows, have been big reasons as to why you're having the season you're having if you're the Pirates. Oviedo, on the other hand, not as much, considering Yostinson Garcia really hasn't hit at the MLB level. But I'm looking at 3 starters that might fit the bill. I think the one that everybody wants to throw out there is Carmen Mlodzinski. And yeah, I would assume the San Diego Padres would have some interest in Carmen Mlodzinski. I think there's a chance that even if there isn't a Mason Miller deal, that the Padres could look at Carmen Mlodzinski as a potential option via a trade. I also look at guys like Bubba Chandler, who just had a phenomenal start at Yankee Stadium on Wednesday night. You look at a guy like Jared Jones, whose name always seems to come up in these conversations. But here's the thing. We talk about, well, this week, it's come out that the Padres want to offload a bad contract. They want an MLB-ready starting pitcher. They want this. They want that. Price goes down on relievers the closer you get to the MLB deadline. That's why if you look at what the Pirates were able to get for David Bednar, it's not looking too rosy 1 year later. Why? Because they traded him at the last possible second. And a lot of times, when you do that, the price comes down. Now, the price isn't going to drop all that much for Mason Miller. I mean, you look at what the Padres paid to get him from the Athletics last year. They sent Leo DeVries, who was the number 1 prospect in their system, was the number 3 prospect in all of baseball. They sent Braden Nett, who was their number 3 prospect. They sent their number 13 and their number 17 prospect in order to get Mason Miller. Now, they also got another bullpen arm who was kind of similar to what the Pirates already have in Brandon Eisert. So you kind of take that with a grain of salt. They got a secondary arm, but we all know that the majority of that return was built around Mason Miller. So what's a realistic trade offer? We've seen some crazy, wild speculations of what the Pirates could pay to get Mason Miller from the Padres. But I think it comes down to 3 pieces. Because, well, for one, the closer we get to the deadline, the more that price is going to drop a little by little. And 2, because if you're getting a major league starting pitcher, then that takes away from the prospect haul that you're allowed to get, in my opinion. So I do give them that starting pitcher that they want. I understand that it takes away from an area that right now is a very thin for the Pirates. But if I'm looking at what starter the Pirates have that I would be okay with parting with, maybe not pleased to part with, but I would be able to swallow losing that player, or stomach losing that player is probably the better term there. Jared Jones is the name. I think it starts with Jared Jones. I think you include your number 2 prospect in Edward Florentino simply because Seth Hernandez is not for sale. No ifs, ands, or buts. Seth Hernandez is untouchable. There have been some people that say, well, yeah, but you could bring in Mason Miller and he fixes a lot of your problems and, win right now. What do you mean win right now? Yeah, I get it, but Seth Hernandez is not just a potential Bubba Chandler. Seth Hernandez is a potential Paul Skeens, Connor Griffin level prospect. You don't trade that away right after you get him into your system. So Hernandez off the table. Jared Jones, I start with that. Edward Florentino, I do throw that out. Again, it's tough to stomach, but you have to give to get, and you give them the number 2 prospect in your system, a top 100 prospect in the MLB, and then you give them your number 5 prospect in Joe Stinson Garcia. And I think that is the deal you make. If the Padres don't want to take it, okay. I understand they want to hold out for a better offer. They might not get one, especially if they want a starting pitcher that is MLB ready. Jared Jones has had a sub-3 ERA over his last 3 or 4 starts. He's a guy that, when healthy and when clicking, is a very dangerous pitcher in this league. If they don't want him, that's fine. The Pirates will continue to have a really good starter on their rotation in a rotation that needs starters right now. But if they want that pitcher, it's going to cost them, and it's going to cost them their closer. If that is the deal that gets made, I mean, you're in a tough spot with your starting rotation. You need Paul Skeens to continue his current trajectory, 3 straight wins. That's great, but he needs to continue to do so. You need the Mitch Keller that we saw on Wednesday afternoon in New York. You need Carmen Mlodzinski to step back into the starting rotation, which I'm sure he'll be very happy about. You would need Wilbur Dotel to step up and backfill that role that Carmen Mlodzinski leaves in the bullpen for the rest of the season, and do so the way he did on, that would have been Monday, against the New York Yankees. So it's not a perfect situation. It doesn't, go without creating some issues for the Pirates. But if you're trying to acquire Mason Miller, I think that's the realistic trade offer that you have to make. Jared Jones, Edward Florentino, and Joe Stinson Garcia. I think that's what you're looking at. So we talked a little bit about the Pittsburgh Pirates and the fact that they are in contention for the playoffs. Another team that surprisingly was in contention for the playoffs and made the playoffs last season was the Pittsburgh Penguins. And last year, that was a surprise. Now, I'm not naive to think that everything that happened last year is sustainable and is going to carry over. And in fact, it's just going to get better this year. There are some things that happened last year that are likely unsustainable going forward. A guy like Anthony Mantha coming in and scoring 33 goals. Everybody's saying that Andrei Kuzmenko is this year's version of Anthony Mantha. Should we be expecting 30 plus goals from Andrei Kuzmenko? Probably not. Tommy Novak, as not just a decent second line center, but overall a pretty good second line center for you. Is that sustainable? I don't know. I don't think that's something that we can just write in pen. Having success in a month like they had in March, 17 game schedule, and they were able to play I think 13 of them against playoff teams and still keep their head above water in the playoffs without Crosby, without Evgeny Malkin. Is that sustainable? Probably not. But there are other things that the Penguins have that I don't think people are giving enough credit for, that are not just sustainable, but that actually should take a step forward to help make up for some of these other things that probably won't be repeated. Igor Chinikov, his performance last year, in my opinion, is sustainable and something that should carry over to this year and should get even better. He scored 18 goals in just over half a season of regular season action with the Penguins. That's a 35 to 40 goal type scorer that you have. Put him on the power play. Who knows? Maybe it gets even higher. Ben Kindle. I mean, you think he's not going to benefit from having a full offseason, knowing what he has to prepare for this year? Artur Shilovs now having that knowledge of what it takes to get through a full NHL season as a goaltender at this level. Those things, I think, are sustainable and, in fact, could get even better. The Penguins last year finished with 98 points in the NHL standings, second in the Metropolitan Division, fifth in the Eastern Conference. Not only that, they scored the most goals by any Penguins team in the Sidney Crosby era in a single season. And they finished third in the NHL in goal scoring. This team, to me, is closer to contention than people think. I'm not saying that they're going to go out there and be contenders this year, but for everybody that sits there and says, well, the Penguins are 4 or 5 years away still, and that might not even be the case, I think you're crazy. I think this is a team that, yes, they still have missing pieces. They still need to figure some things out. They still need, in my opinion, a marketable young star to jump in and kind of take the reins. Could that be Ben Kindle? Maybe. Could that be Bill Zonin? Maybe. Could that be, Shane Wright? Possibly. I think they still need one of those guys. I think they obviously need to figure some things out on the left side of their defense, but they're not 4 or 5 years away. I wouldn't even say they're 3 years away from figuring some things out and being a team that is perennially in the playoffs and constantly making noise once they get there. I mean, even if you look at last year, which some people are looking at now and saying, yeah, that was an aberration, that they were able to play that well in the regular season and they came back down to earth in games 1 through 3. I think overall, yes, they got a slow start in games 1 and 2. And I think part of that can be allocated to the fact that they completely mismanaged the last weekend of the season. Load management, whatever it was. I don't think that was what the Penguins needed, and I think Dan Muse will learn from that. But I thought they were decent in game 3. They just couldn't get the job done. I think they were the far better team in games 4 through 6. It's just the fact that Dan Vladar was able to steal game 6. So I don't think the Penguins were a team last year that were just an easy one and done in the playoffs. I think they were a team that had the capability last year to be a playoff series winner. Now, is there a gap between them and the Hurricanes right now? Certainly. But give it 1 or 2 more off seasons, considering the tools at the disposal of Kyle Dubas, this team could be back in contention, true contention, sooner than a lot of people think. I think if you look at the work that he did this offseason, they got slightly better. You do have the exact same top 6 as of this moment, but I like the addition of Nicholas Robertson. I like the addition of Andrei Kuzmenko, and that could go one of two ways. It could go the way of Anthony Mantha, where he's good and you're good, and you just have to play him until he walks in free agency, or it could go the way of how you expected last year to go with Anthony Mantha. Try to refurbish his career to the point where, well, there's value there at the trade deadline, and you use that to push forward your rebuild. I like the addition of Caden Korzak. I think that answers a lot of questions of what does the right side of the defense look like when Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang inevitably leave the organization. You have Harrison Brunick, and now you have Caden Korzak. 2 of 3 answers on the right side. Not only that, I think the cavalry is coming from the minors with a handful of players that not enough people are giving credit for being potentially, I would say, a star-level player in Sergei Murashov, a star-level goaltender in Sergei Murashov, and then very good players in Harrison Brunick, who I already mentioned, Bill Zonin, and Rutger McGroarty. Talked about McGroarty on Tuesday's episode of Burgh Breakdown. I'm very bullish on him. So where do the Penguins currently stand? They're still a bit away from the top tier. But to me, even going into this season, they're certainly a playoff caliber team. In fact, I think they are at least round 1 winning caliber team, depending on what form they're in when they go into the playoffs. That was a big part of last year, and who the matchup is, because matchups mean everything when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, they do need to figure out their long-term future on the left side of their defense. They do need to figure out kind of some top-level talent that is going to be able to stick around for 10 plus years. You know, that star player that I mentioned that, again, maybe it's Shane Wright, maybe it's somebody else. We saw them kind of dip their toe in the water of the Jason Robertson sweepstakes. That could have been a possible answer because he's 26 years old, could have been around for the next 6, 7, 8 years as a star player for you. But I do think that overall, the Penguins are a lot closer than people give them credit for. I understand the skepticism. I understand based on what you've seen over the past several years, not to mention what you've seen happen in Detroit when that crazy legacy franchise kind of went the way that it did, the same way that it did in Chicago and the struggles they've had to find their way back. But I think the Penguins, from what they've done over the past couple of years and where they stand right now, I think they're much closer than anybody will give them credit for. Let's close off this episode with the Pittsburgh Steelers, probably the last time that we will see the Steelers go last on this show for quite some time because, well, outside of next Tuesday's episode, this is the final recording before training camp starts in the Trope. And I keep saying it time and time again. It's just because I'm excited. So let's look at this season from a different point of view. Let's look at it by talking about 5 players, in my opinion, that will define the Steelers season in 2026. At number 5, I have Darnell Washington. And his inclusion on this list might not go over well with some Steelers fans because of some of the names that, quite frankly, didn't make the list. But the Steelers with Darnell Washington versus what they looked like without Darnell Washington in that final week against the Ravens and in the playoffs against the Texans, it was staggering, the difference. Last season, Darnell Washington, I mean, when you want to define a breakout season for a tight end, you just open the dictionary and you point to Darnell Washington's picture because it's going to be right next to that definition. 31 receptions, 364 yards, and 1 touchdown in 16 games. And I know the counting stats don't sound all that sexy. But let's not forget, that 1 touchdown is because a lot of the time, Kenneth Gainwell was stealing everybody's touchdowns last year. Not only that, Darnell Washington, it felt like, was the go-to on 2-point conversions that just doesn't show up in the stat sheet. You look at what he's able to do when he's healthy, when he's utilized correctly, which he finally was for the first time last season. He changes games with his size and his strength. Sometimes it takes 4 or 5 defenders to take him down, certainly if it's a second member of the secondary that's trying to take him down. And that is so important for Aaron Rodgers, so important for this Steelers team, specifically on third down, that all you have to do sometimes on a 3rd and 5 is dump it to Darnell Washington 2 yards off the line of scrimmage, and he's going to get you those last 3 because, well, it takes about 6 yards for somebody to actually get him on the ground. He changes the entire outlook of drives whenever he just bowls through the defense the way he was able to on countless occasions last year. So yeah, I do think that Darnell Washington is one of the most important members of this Pittsburgh Steelers offense going into the 2026 season. At number 4, speaking of the offense, we're going to stay on that side of the ball, but we're going to go to the trenches. At number 4, Zach Frazier. He is the leader of the most impactful position group of the Pittsburgh Steelers. What is this offensive line going to be? That's one of the biggest question marks that surrounds this team, because everything else you can kind of look at and say, all right, there's expectation there because we've either seen it before or that's where the trajectory is heading. The Steelers' offensive line has not been able to pick up a whole heck of a lot of momentum because they've been changing and moving and adapting so frequently over the past couple of years. The first episode of Burgh Breakdown, what did we talk about? We talked about how Troy Fautanu was moving over to left tackle, how Mason McCormick was moving, how the biggest position battle is right tackle between Dylan Cook and Maxi Honachor. This offensive line has not had a chance to build chemistry, build consistency, and really build a resume together over the past several seasons. But individually, Zach Frazier has been able to do a lot of those things. He is quickly ascending to become one of, if not the best centers in the entire National Football League. So the biggest question for me when it comes to him is, can he get his group to finally click? There's one clip that, sticks in my memory when thinking of the Hard Knocks in season with the AFC North. What did Mike Tomlin say? And I understand Mike Tomlin's not with the Steelers anymore, but what did he say to Cam Hayward going into halftime of one of the games that they were featuring on that show? Hey, get your group together. We need you guys in the second half. Cam Hayward is the leader of the defensive line. Zach Frazier is the leader of that offensive line. He needs to lead by example in the way that he plays, and he just needs to lead in general as the center of that unit, as the guy on the Steelers offensive line. He holds an incredible amount of importance to what this line, and then transversely, what this team is going to be in 2026. At number 3, nothing changes a game like a shutdown corner, especially in the AFC North. So Joey Porter Jr. is my number 3 for the most impactful Steelers. The 5 players who will define this season, Joey Porter Jr. is up there. I mean, there's a reason that we're talking about, is he going to be top 10 paid cornerback in the league, top 5 paid, highest paid cornerbacks in the league by the time the season starts in September? You look at the wide receivers that the Steelers are facing. Let's just go from weeks 1 to 3. Week 1, Drake London. Week 2, A.J. Brown. Week 3, Jamar Chase. That's just a small sample size of the importance of having a guy that can shut down opposing wide receiver ones. Joey Porter Jr. last year was able to do that in a heck of a lot of instances. You need to be able to limit top guys in this league, and that's why he's going to hold so much importance, so much impact on the 2026 Steelers. At number 2, I already mentioned him once. He's the leader of the defensive line, and that's Cam Hayward. Because the Steelers defense, as with most defenses in football, it all starts with stopping the run. And stopping the run for the Steelers defense all starts with Cam Hayward. The defensive front is very talented. Derek Harmon I expect to have a huge season. If he can stay healthy and stay on the field, he's probably going to show you why a lot of people see him as the heir apparent to Cam Hayward. Y.A. Black and Keanu Benton, I have high expectations for. I thought it was a really good addition bringing in Sebastian Joseph Day to be a nice depth piece for the Steelers and just bolster that defensive line. But Cam Hayward is the heartbeat of not just that unit, but really the entire Steelers defense. If he's off, they're off. If he's on, look out. Because I think the Steelers defense is going to finally start to live up to some of those external expectations that have been heaved upon them for the past several seasons. Cam Hayward is where it all begins for that side of the football. So he holds the highest importance from that side of the football. And number one, there's not a whole heck of a lot that goes into this one. It's Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is the top player that is going to define the Steelers season in 2026. Listen, I like Will Howard. I personally like Drew Aller, but I'm aware that he's probably not going to see the field at all this year. I'm intrigued to see how that project pans out, but I think we all know that if Aaron Rodgers goes down, the man that we should see is Will Howard. I believe in him. I like him. I don't like him enough to believe that the drop off isn't extremely drastic from Aaron Rodgers to Will Howard. I think Howard might be able to hold the line for a game, 2, maybe 3, similar to what we saw from Mason Rudolph back at the end of the 2023 season. But anything more than that, and let's not forget, Aaron Rodgers is over the age of 40, which you hate to say it, but football is a very, very physical sport, and there's a reason not many quarterbacks play that long. Anything more than 2, maybe 3 games of an absence from Aaron Rodgers, and this season is going in a completely different direction. So almost by default, you have to have Aaron Rodgers at number 1, at least in my opinion. I do think that if, at looking back at number 4, if Zach Frazier and his unit can do what kind of the expectations are of them when it comes to a unit that is so talented and so young, then yeah, I think the ceiling is raised for this offense going into 2026, and Aaron Rodgers is a big part of that. So the 5 players, in my opinion, who will define the Steelers season: Darnell Washington, Zach Frazier, Joey Porter Jr., Cam Hayward, and Aaron Rodgers. And I know what some of you are saying. I can hear it already. Where's TJ Watt? In my opinion, he might be 7, he might be 8, but if TJ Watt has a bad season, like, I don't know, he did last year, I think the Steelers have the talent around him in Alex Highsmith, in Nick Herbig, who just inked a massive extension, in Jack Sawyer, to still be able to get some pretty good production out of the outside linebacker position. So that's my reasoning for not putting him in my top 5. But let me know in the comment section what you think of my top 5 players who will define this year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Burgh Breakdown. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. I've really just enjoyed the first 2 weeks of Burgh Breakdown, and it's only going to get better because we are less than 2 weeks from the MLB trade deadline. We're getting ready for a playoff push for the Pirates. Training camp starts next week. And of course, there is always the Pittsburgh Penguins, whose season is on the horizon. It's out there somewhere. You just have to wait a little bit longer and it'll be visible and clear for all to see. But that's it for this episode. We'll see you guys next time.